People are getting murdered at a brewery in Causton. That's what happens when you don't tip. This week we are talking beer connoisseurs
British gangsters.
and the etiquette of one-night stands. This episode of
Welcome to Midsomer.
Hello and welcome to Midsomer, the podcast where we dissect all the mysteries, the murders, and the many weird things about the long-running hit TV show Midsomer Murders. I'm your host, Eric Buscher, and with me as always is my co-host, Eileen Becker. Hi, Eileen.
Hey, Eric. Today we are talking about the Ghost of Causton Abbey, the first episode of the 20th series. It originally aired May 3rd, 2018 on Acorn TV, and then a year later on May 10th on British television. It was directed by Matt Carter and written by Helen Jenkins. Let's order around.
Is it Causton or Corsten?
I have to approach the British pronunciation. I actually have to kind of put an R in there and do Causton. It's kind of I don't know. I can't do it. I have to put an R in Causton. I'm not British.
It's sort of this Leicester versus Leicester.
Yeah, I can do that better.
Spoiler warning, we will be discussing the events of this episode, including the identity of the murderer. So if you haven't watched it yet and don't want to know who done it, pause this and go watch it. We will still be here when you get back.
I'm DCI John Barnaby. I was hoping for an estimated time of death.
Are you a smoker? Heavy drinker?
No.
Then I give you another 30 years.
We open in Causton Abbey, 1539. A monk named Brother Joseph is in chains, accused of poisoning people with beer brewed at the abbey. He is lifted over a vat of boiling liquid, and before he is to be boiled to death, he curses the entire abbey. And then he goes for a dip. Cut to the abbey in modern day, where it has been converted to a craft brewery selling cursed ale. It's launch day, and a crowd celebrates with owner Imani Taylor, her brewmaster sister Fiza, and Imani's builder husband Paul. Imani gives a speech announcing a major order while a suspicious man sneaks in and steals one of the monk's robes that all the servers are wearing. Later on, Fiza gives a tour of the brewery and discovers something upsetting about the beer. The next day, Paul's mom Irene comes over from the local retirement community to help clean up the brewery after the party, as moms do. She finds a shoe laying around and climbs up to the top of the vats to investigate. Inside one of the vats, she finds a body boiled to death. Barnaby and Winter are called to the scene. The body looks to be a writer named Adam Asoba, although because of the condition of the body, he's hard to ID. Because the vat door has to be closed manually, this is a case of murder. A beer case, if you will.
Boom.
I'm just going to sit here and wait. Adam was a popular ghostwriter for celebrities and was working on a lifestyle book about the brewery. Imani, a former publicist, is in full damage control mode, seeing this as an attack on the business and wanting to control the narrative. She suggests one possible culprit is Russell Grundy, a local councilman and the leader of the Real Ale Society. He's not a fan of the brewery and has been working to undermine them. After they leave, Fiza explodes at her sister, accusing her of ruining everything. Paul tries to comfort Imani, but it's clear they are hiding something. That something being a bloody shirt that Paul will later bury in a construction site. The detectives make a trip to Adam's apartment and find some generic beer in the fridge, a collection of microcassette tapes, and a message from a journalist wanting to connect about a big scoop. But no real personal effects, which is strange. Just then a man tries to enter the cottage and then runs when he sees the police. After he is caught in the laziest chase scene ever, he says he is Kwame Asante and that he had met Adam the night before and had a one-night stand. He spent the night while Adam left to go to the brewery. He ran because he's married with a kid and doesn't want to be caught up in all this. Irene recognizes Adam from his frequent visits to her retirement community. Apparently, he was interviewing Keith Grundy, who happens to be Russell's dad. Keith was a member of the infamous Kenton gang and is rumored to be involved in the famous disappearance of Charlie Allen. Keith says that Adam was working on his memoir. More of a story of a former gangster redeemed into a good citizen and denies killing him. But Russell had read the first draft of the memoir, and it was way more salacious than his father wanted, and he tried to stop Adam from dragging the good Grundy name through the mud. Keith's nurse, Jenny, who happens to be Paul's ex, was also meeting with Adam, but that was so he could help her write her memoir for her kids since she's dyslexic. Also, wandering around somewhere is grandson Toby Grundy, working odd jobs around the village, and actress Sylvia Reynolds, who worked with Adam on her memoir and seems delighted to be involved in a murder case. John visits prickly new coroner Fleur Perkins for more information. She can only give them a time of death because they still need to make a positive dental ID. John invites her over to dinner with Sarah and Winter. When she accepts, she immediately starts pushing John to get Patty fixed. Well, she says castrated. Later, she matches the dental records to Adam Lamont, a writer who went missing 3 years ago and was presumed dead. Lamont's partner turns out to be Kwame. Apparently, they had been in a massive debt and the relationship was pretty much over, so they decided to fake Adam's death for life insurance. But now Adam had wanted to come back to life, even if it means destroying Kwame's current one. Despite originally denying he was there, they find evidence that Russell had been on the Abbey grounds around the time of the murder, looking for real ale traders. They also found DNA evidence that a Grundy male had been inside Adam's house. That could be Toby because he had done some work for Adam. While he was there, some woman from the brewery had showed up and laid into Adam, firing him. That woman turns out to be Amani, and she inadvertently helps the detectives uncover a big clue. Adam doesn't drink beer. So why did he have beer in his cottage? Because he was looking for evidence that Amani had been mislabeling cheap beer and selling it as cursed ale. She says they had more demand than they could supply, and also, who would ever notice the difference in beer? This might have been the story that Adam was looking to peddle to the press. But it also could have been the juicy scoop that shows up in the tabloids about Sylvia Reynolds drunkenly making fun of a famous friend. Was Adam committing the ultimate no-no for ghostwriters? Selling secrets?
Ooh. Selling secrets.
Yep. Now, Eileen, for some tourist info.
Yeah, we are in Causton this week. It's the home of both Barnaby families and the location of the Criminal Investigation Department, the CID, the Causton Playhouse. Oh, and an old abbey that's been turned into a craft brewery.
Yeah, we're never really in Causton that much, so it is kind of a nice surprise when we are.
Yeah, just the home scenes. The one trial was taking place there, and occasionally we see Joyce hanging around there and doing stuff. But not very often.
I think Causton might have the lowest per murder rate in the entire area.
Yeah, in the entire county of Midsomer. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk. I mean, obviously, the main focal point about this entire episode is the brewery, the Cursed Ale Brewery.
Yeah.
Let's just start with like the obvious question: is just like, why did they even try this cheap beer switch?
You would think that people would notice. I know beer people, and they are very, very picky, unless they are the Bud Light people, and then they probably would notice.
Like, you're so worried about Russell Grundy.
Yeah.
And like Grundy would instantly know the difference.
Oh yeah, and probably did. He probably got the bad kind.
Yeah. Now, obviously, part of this is a plan made by a alcoholic, as we'll discuss in the second half. Amani has a big drinking problem, but it was more panic. It seemed more of a panic situation than anything else.
Yeah, I think it was more of a panic situation. Yeah.
Kind of speaking about Russell, so like, tell me a little bit more about this campaign for real ale that Russell seems to be a member of.
It started in the 1970s as a reaction against modern brewing practices, such as filtering out the yeast in draft beer casks. It mainly has to do with draft beer, not bottled beer. And as the beer is drawn out, it loses carbon dioxide. And normally the yeast would go through a second fermentation while it's in the keg, but with filtering, carbon dioxide has to be injected to keep the beer fresh. It extends the life for pubs, especially.
Okay. So I mean, the way it's kind of projected though is it's very much like Beer Snob versus the new upstart. And then also I felt it was a little weird because it was like very much like a classic, not class, but like kind of an upper class white man going after two women of Middle Eastern or Muslim or Indian. They never really say, but clearly of non-white heritage. It felt a little racist.
Yeah.
And sexist, considering it's like,
And
again, also,
sexist, yeah.
yep.
But what really disturbed me was that creepy wax figure at the
Who
beginning.
puts that there? Who puts that there?
That's some really messed up PR there, Amani.
That's just like we need decorations. Put the creepiest freaking thing you can find.
Yeah, it's bad enough they're all in monk robes.
It's like having like a Ronald McDonald house, but all the Ronald McDonalds have those weird monster clown masks. You know what? They have the fangs.
Yeah, like It or whatever. Pennywise. Yeah.
I thought the whole idea of the curse again was sort of a herring that quickly, much like the last episode that we did, the Christmas haunting, the idea that, oh, is it a curse? It just doesn't last more than a half a second. Like
Yeah.
like I don't even know why they had to show the whole opening scene of the monks.
Hey, the guy gets brewed in his brew or whatever. Though it looked more like tar.
Yeah, it just seemed like even because they had to explain the opening wasn't even it they had to actually explain what we were watching.
Yeah.
But they did it later on, like 15 minutes after we watched it. They had to explain what we saw, as opposed to just adding some dialogue. They could have said, "Oh, for your punishment of poison, brother Joseph, you were sentenced to death." But like it could have been anything, like just one sentence, but they didn't even have it for some reason.
Yeah.
It just felt weird.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that it's cursed ale selling cursed brew.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that Imani needed a new career change. She's not a good publicist.
No, well, she obviously didn't do Elaine Page any favors.
No, no, no. But the brewery did lead to one of the stranger kills I think we've ever seen on Midsomer. The guy got boiled alive in beer.
Yeah, this is another one of those food and beverage related murders that the show has a habit of doing. You know, we've obviously had poisonings of wine, brandy, soup. We've had poisonous mushrooms.
Yeah.
Victims were famously struck with expensive wine bottles and artisan cheese rounds, and one was crushed between cases of relish. Others were drowned in gazpacho, which we've talked about before, claret, malt whiskey, and a bowl of water with eels and hard-boiled eggs that was related to a song. One was enrobed in chocolate, and another was poisoned by CO2 from wine vats. One poor victim was even found himself eaten by a wild boar. And then, of course, food adjacent items are popular as well. Lots of kitchen knives, saucepans, a corkscrew, an ice pick, various cheese implements, carving forks, a poisoned empty tin biscuit, which we've discussed, and several walk-in freezers. And then one victim was placed in a vat of cider after being murdered by an apple tree shaker.
Now you wrote all that from memory, right?
Yeah. No, I did look it up. Thank you, Internet.
I have to say, boiled alive in beer though, it's for all the ones who just like that it stood out to me as shockingly painful and violent.
Yeah, it looked like a really awful way to go. I'd rather be stabbed by the beer implement.
Yeah, I mean, I would rather be beaten with by a cheese round, but he could have just eat this until you die. Like, okay,
Yeah.
but no, it's this episode. I have to say, and we'll talk more about it as we kind of dig deeper into the second half of the episode. I feel this episode does this weird balance of kind of going for like humor, like trying to have like some really awkward humor bits and dark humor bits, but some really stark violence and some really dark tragedy, especially at the end. That just like it's not. There's a darker undercurrent to this whole episode that it actually I think is really strong, and I think this makes it like watching this episode again. I was like, this episode is much stronger than I remember, and this darker undercurrent I think is the thing that makes it age well. But it is for a show that has multiple murders in every episode. I don't particularly think of Midsomer as a dark show.
No, and a lot of the, like I said, a lot of the murders have a weirdness to him, strangeness to him, even sometimes even quaintness to him. I think the most violent one we've talked about so far is probably the Rainbirds, who
Yeah.
were almost, decapitated
Yeah.
by a knife. That's pretty violent.
Yeah, I think in the terms of like Mystery World, I always view Midsummer as more of an Agatha Christie style whodunit.
Hmm.
And I think this one has more of a, because of the the, the sort of the sadder end,
Hmm.
it has much more of a noir feel. It has much more of almost like a 70s neo noir, like a Chinatown feel.
Yeah, yeah. And I think both of them are kind of encapsulated in the stabbing with the brewing tool of Imani, which we'll get to later,
Yeah.
which is reminiscent of the pitchforking of Orlando Bloom in Judgment Day, which was played almost to comic effect. And he was
Yes.
such an unlikable character in that. And Imani, there's a lot of echoing of the way that was shot in this one. But in many ways, she is a much more complicated character than he was because she does
Yes.
have a disease, and
Yeah.
nobody has apparently helped her.
Yeah, and I really want to let's I want to come back to that when we talk to the second half, because I do feel
Hmm.
that there's a lot going on with sort of the killer's motive and the explanation that also like as you say feels very it's yeah, nobody like Amani, it kind of comes down to Amani had some severe issues that nobody really was helping.
Yeah.
Speaking of Amani, shall we talk about her in the cast highlights?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, she's played by Amber Aga, who was born in London and then moved to North Africa and lived there until the age of 5, then returned back to Britain. She graduated from Cambridge with a law degree, but was also part of Cambridge's drama scene. And afterwards, she went to study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. She's best known for her roles in Murder City as Dr. Anvar Perez and Shakespeare in Hathaway as D.I. Marlowe. She's also a published poet and actually won the Times International Poetry Competition while in college.
I think she actually has like there's a couple poetry books. I don't know if they're available in the States.
Mm.
I saw the books online when I was researching, but I don't know if they're actually available in the US. They're also like from 2000, like the early 2000s, I believe.
Next, we have Anjali Mohindra, who is Faiza Jindal. Her first break was a small role on Coronation Street, and her breakthrough was playing Rani Chandra on the Doctor Who spin-off The Sarah Jane Chronicles. She played the suicide bomber Nadia on the monster hit series Bodyguard, and she's appeared in the stage adaptation of the best-selling book Behind the Beautiful Forevers, the naval thriller Vigil, and the film Munich, The Edge of War. Most recently, she's starring in the science fiction show The Lazarus Project, which was a hit for Sky but has yet to air in the US.
I believe it is coming in when this episode we're recording now airs, it should be in January, and I believe The Lazarus is going to be on TNT in February.
Oh, cool.
Michael Byrne played Wiley Keith Grundy. Now, Byrne had a long career. He joined the National Theater in 1964. You might recognize him as the evil Nazi Colonel Vogel who goes over the cliff in the tank in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He was Smythe, the English soldier who attempts to rape William Wallace's wife and thereby causing a revolution in Braveheart. He's Gellert Grindelwald in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, and he's Horace Greeley in Gangs of New York. His most recent role is the character Old Jack in the creepy HBO Max series The Baby. Playing his son Russell Grundy is Tony Gardner. Now, before he was an actor, Gardner actually qualified as a physician at Guy's Hospital in 1987, and he became a GP in 93. However, performing apparently was in his blood, and he started doing comedy in this comedy duo called Struck Off and Die with Phil Hammond, who is also now a well-regarded medical commentator in the UK, writer, and comedian. He gave up medicine for the arts, and he was quickly appearing in shows like My Parents Are Aliens, Lead Balloon, Last Tango in Halifax, The Thick of It, and most recently in the show Not Going Out with Lee Mack. Now, he is also on the governing board for the British Actors Trade Union, so good for him to have a side hustle.
Mm-hmm.
And rounding out the Grundy family, playing hustling grandson Toby, is Zeb Dempster. Say that right, Dempster. This is actually his last role, listed in IMDb. Because previous to this, he appeared in Waterloo Road and Casualty. He seems to have stopped acting to pursue a DJ career. He actively performs in 2 DJ groups, one called Dual Monitor and one called Midnight Groove. You can find out information about those on Instagram.
Next, we have Angela Griffin, who played Jenny Moss. She's been active in British television since the 90s. She had a stint on Coronation Street and was an original cast member for both Waterloo Row and Holby City. She was in the last 2 seasons of Lewis, as well as Harlots, White Lines, The Suspect, and Choose or Die. In 2008, she was a contestant on a daytime reality show called Murder Most Famous, where she and other celebrities each wrote a mystery novel while being coached by the great mystery writer Minette Walters. She didn't win, though. That went to her fellow Coronation Street star, Sherry Hewson. Jason Morrell's was poor Paul Taylor, her ex-husband. Morrell's first film was 1994's To Die For, not the Nicole Kidman one. Morrell's works really well with Angela Griffin, apparently. They both appeared together in the show Cutting It, and then both of them were originally cast members for Waterloo Road. Morrell's appeared for several years on the soap opera Emmerdale, playing businessman Declan Macy. When Morrell's left the show, his character was written off by going into hiding after killing his half-nephew and attempting to murder his most recent wife, whom he only married earlier in the year. Typical soap opera stuff. Recently, he appeared in Agatha Raisin as love interest Sir Charles Frayth. He's great in that. His brother, Simon Morrells, is also a successful actor, although he's never appeared in Midsomer, so is he really that successful?
Nope.
Anita Harris played Irene Taylor. As a child, she had a love of ice skating that eventually got her noticed by a talent agent, which led her to becoming a dancer and then a singer. She performed with the John Barry Seven, that's the John Barry who composed the James Bond theme, and as a solo act. It wasn't until 1967 that she broke through with her single, Just Lovin' You, which reached number 6 on the UK charts. At the same time, she dabbled in acting and then co-starred in Follow That Camel and Carry On Doctor. Since then, she's worked on stage and screen and appeared in Jumbleland, French and Saunders, Casualty, and EastEnders. According to IMDb, she appeared in ads for the Slender Tone body toning system because she was known for her impressive abs.
I do love the trivia in IMDb sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's funny that's what I'm guessing. If those ads were very well known in the UK, that's why she was doing the exercise classes.
Yes, for people over 60 who can't get out of chairs, apparently. I say that as someone who can get out of her chair.
So far. Chu Omambala played Kwame Asante. Now, when he was younger, he was never interested in the theater. It wasn't until he realized all his favorite film and TV actors started in theater that his interest was piqued. He's guested on Doctor Who, Doctors, and Casualty. He had a supporting role in the series Liars, and he most recently had a role in Magpie Murders, the adaptation of the mystery novel from Anthony Horowitz, who helped create Midsomer. Justin Pierre was the murder victim Adam Asoba. Now, his first role on screen was Prince Ivar in the show Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, which was produced by the same people who gave us the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, so you can guess what that show was like. His career seems to be on an upward trend right now, after years of doing a lot of guest spots on Casualty, Doctors, and Waterloo Road. Most recently, he had a multiple episode stint on Emmerdale Farms as D.S. Benton. And then John Cummins, a very brief role as the less than buoyant brother Joseph. He's a working character actor. He's appeared in small roles in Doctor Who, The Witcher, Temple, and most recently in the show Code 404. According to his website, he's currently filming a show called The Following Events Are Based on a Pack of Lies for BBC One.
Now we come to our village star, which of course is Elaine Page, who went full Norman Desmond playing stage star Sylvia Reynolds. Elaine is called the First Lady of Musical Theater and has starred in a number of West End and Broadway productions. Basically, she's the Patti LuPone of the UK.
I think that's a fair description.
Yeah, they've done many of the same roles.
Yeah,
She made her first stage appearance in 1964, and her West End debut came with her appearance in the 1968 production of Hair. She originated the role of Eva Perón in Evita and the role of Grisabella in Cats. In fact, Her rendition of Memory was a top 10 hit.
How
In
does that song go?
Do you really want me to sing? Yeah, you can put that in a clip. Violate some copyright laws. In 1994, she had to step into the role of Norman Desmond in Sunset Boulevard when Betty Buckley had to have an emergency appendectomy. She only had 2.5 weeks to prepare and still received an Olivier Award nomination for it. In 2013, she announced the Page by Page by Page tour, a celebration of 50 years in the business as well as a farewell tour. The tour was a massive sellout. Now, much like what happens in this episode, Paige has gained a reputation for being difficult, although she says she is just serious and confident. After Midsomer, she appeared in the 2020 miniseries called Life.
Yeah, I did a little research. I couldn't find any information of why exactly she did Midsomer at this point.
I couldn't either.
But this feels like it's weird because this feels like a big get.
It does, and it feels like it may have been something she just wanted to do as a fan, even.
Yeah.
She hasn't done a whole lot of television, so it just felt like this may have been a role they wrote for her because somebody said, "Hey, Elaine Paige, well, we hear you like Midsomer."
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing, like one difference. Like Patti LuPone has done a ton of film and TV work, especially in the last 20 years. But Paige has not. That 2020 miniseries seems to be her most recent credit. She's still fantastic in this role and definitely playing a Norma Desmond type, a person sort of struggling with their relevance.
Yeah. She doesn't go so over the top that it's a caricature, but you know that she's the diva.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of loved that she was delighted at before she gets sucked deeper into the thing. She was like, "Ooh, a murder investigation. Am I in it?
And I'm in it. Oh, I have to be careful because the press will show up." Yeah.
There's always that scene where like the aging actor or actress watches themselves, like a younger performance of themselves and it's just like that wistful thing. I thought they handled that pretty well.
Yeah. It was very much a we had faces moment.
Yes, very much so. So we have a weird return visitors this week. This episode is a first for us in that it's the first episode we've done where there are no repeat visitors in the main guest cast. That's right. As of this recording, none of the main cast has appeared in a Midsomer Murders episodes before or since. And that's kind of incredible considering some of the careers in these people who have like 20, 30 years, like people like Angela Griffin and Jason Morales, have very lengthy resumes.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that they weren't in Midsomer previously, but they weren't. But that doesn't mean there are no return visitors in this episode. There was a large amount of background players in this episode who appeared in other episodes. All of them were uncredited in this episode. So we feel let's give them a little bit of credit right now.
We're on this theme of crediting background players.
Yeah.
Who are so essential to making Midsomer feel like a real place.
Especially things like this where they had like a lot of group scenes, the monastery, at the party. We're not going to go into the careers out of all of them. They're all working actors in the UK. Giovanni Jim Cufaro played an exam student. He appeared in Death and the Divas, Let Us Pray, The Dagger Club, and The Death of the Small Coppers. Stephen McDade was a monk. He appeared in The Dagger Club and Saints and Sinners. Noticing there's also a lot of crossover in some of these guys as well. Adrian Mitchell plays a brewery guest who appeared in Breaking the Chain. Peter Coe playing party guest, which I'm guessing is probably the same as brewery guest, was in Death by Persuasion and The Curse of the Ninth. Manoj Anand played a brewery guest. He appeared in Send in the Clowns. And then finally, Jamie Lee Beecher was also a brewery guest in this episode and showed up in The Lions of Causton and Send in the Clowns. So that like 6 regular Midsomer character actors, many of them obviously with multiple appearances on the show. So happy to have them back.
Yeah. We love them. They're essential.
Yep. Are you saying they're essential workers?
They are essential workers.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with the second half of this episode. And we're back. Let's look at the second half of Ghost of Causton Abbey.
Sorry I'm late. I was removing a chainsaw from a chest cavity. I wish these farmers wouldn't drink.
Paddy! I am so sorry. He's not usually like this.
Still got his testicles. That's your problem.
Told you, just your type. Very funny.
If he's aggressive, you need to think about castration.
Oh, but he's not aggressive. We've had him for a year and he's never...
There are all sorts of health benefits. Ian, my boyfriend's a vet. I'll get him to give you a call.
Barnaby and Winter discover one of Sylvia's interview tapes has gone missing from Adam's cottage. Sylvia says she got drunk during an interview and told Adam about the items reported in the tabloid. So he tried to blackmail her. And then Sylvia went to Amani, her former publicist, who told her she would take care of it. Guess what? She didn't.
Nope.
They also find a tape of Keith threatening Adam to keep his nose out of certain areas. They interrogate Keith, whose attitude is basically a refreshing, so what if I did? That night, as Barnaby reads a bedtime story to his daughter, a drunken Amani sees lights in the abbey. She goes to investigate and is stabbed to death. The next morning, Paul says he had gone to bed early and didn't see her at all because when Amani drinks, he sleeps in the spare room. Turns out brewery owner Amani was an alcoholic who would drunkenly wander the abbey at all hours. Fiza turns out to be around as well, but now she's missing and her apartment has been trashed. Fleur says Amani's body was dragged to the part of the abbey where Brother Joseph was killed, and she was stabbed with an ancient brewing tool. So is this part of the curse? Amani's body also shows signs of both alcoholism and physical abuse. The detectives talk to Jenny, who says Paul was never violent to her. Her alibi for Amani's murder is she was walking Keith's dogs. They also find Fiza, who has been hanging out with Jenny. She had trashed her own apartment out of rage at what Amani had done to cursed ale. She never wanted to substitute cheap beer for her beloved creation. Back at the abbey, they find evidence of someone trying to dig out an ancient tunnel. Inside are some human skeletal remains, as well as equipment for a counterfeit coin operation. Now, this is a Grundy enterprise, with Toby using Keith's old equipment to make fake coins. Russell had been trying to help Toby cover up the operation, and so he was on the grounds when Amani was murdered. Toby also stole the tape for Sylvia because he's trying to save money to escape his dad. Can't blame him.
Nope.
Finally, they go back to Keith and tell him they believe the body that they found in the tunnel is the missing Charlie Allen. But Keith finally admits that he was never a gangster. He was just the Kenton's babysitter. When he went to prison for counterfeiting, he lied to keep himself safe. He has no idea where Charlie Allen is. The detectives find a missing work schedule from the night Adam was murdered and discover that Amani was supposed to have been in the brew room that night. So it looks like she was the intended victim all along. They also find her blood on Paul's clothing, more evidence that he abused her. Except that Paul says it was the other way around. A drunk Amani was a violent Amani who would black out and attack him. He even shows them fresh scars on his own body. The morning of Adam's murder, Amani had woken up on the floor of the office with the bloody shirt and no memory. Barnaby realizes that no one had actually seen that it was indeed Jenny who walked the dogs and catches her in a lie about giving medication to Keith. So they go to the center on the same day that she and Paul are celebrating one of their children's birthday. And here's the reveal. Jenny is dying. They never say what exactly, although she mentions cancer at one point. And she was scared about having her kids raised by a violent alcoholic. She intended to murder Amani in the brew room, but Adam showed up instead. He tried to get her to give up the knife she was holding, but instead they scuffled and he fell in the vat. Knowing that he wouldn't survive, she just shut the vat door. Aware of the legend of Brother Joseph, she then kills Amani in a way that make it look like it was all part of this curse. She had an accomplice. Irene, Paul's mom, walked the dogs to give Jenny the alibi. They did it because Paul is in true denial about the danger Amani presented to his children. Barnaby allows Jenny a couple of minutes with her children as it will be the final birthday she will ever have with them. Oh, and the cave body? That was Brother Joseph, as we find out in the most awkward closing sequence ever. So as I said in the first half, like this ending gives the episode a very tragic feel.
Yeah.
Everyone is sort of at the end of this has lost something. Russell's lost his kid. Keith's lost his lies. Fiza's lost her brewery because there's no way that's coming back.
Yeah.
Paul has lost his wife, his
and the mother
ex-wife,
of children. Yeah.
his mother. I mean, it's definitely, on the scale of like sort of Midsomer, there's no happy ending here.
Yeah. Reputations are left shattered pretty much all around. Nobody is coming out of this in any way, shape, or form in a
Yeah.
positive light.
And I felt my heart broke for those kids.
Yeah.
Even though we don't, I feel it's kind of weird that the kids were such a big factor in the motivation. We never spend any real time with them.
Yeah. I felt that they could have had her dealing with her kids a little bit more.
Yeah, or
Just a
Paul,
scene
or
or two. Yeah.
yeah, it just felt like it was just they were always sort of there in the background. But my heart bled for them because they're losing their mom. They've their stepdad is probably going to be really messed up for a long period of time.
Their grandmother will even go to jail as an
Yeah.
accessory. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that Amani is sort of a unique victim slash villain
Mm-hmm.
in Midsomer. As we talked about, she is an addict. She is on many levels, she is a victim of a disease.
Yes.
I mean, she has to take, responsibility for her actions while she is drinking, but she is, as much a victim in this. But going from she's an alcoholic to we have to kill her felt like we're missing either a huge chunk of the story or it's just that's absolutely a bonkers next step.
Well, she does mention that the kids are having reactions to it and that she had been violent with them, not just with Paul. She does mention
Yeah.
some bruises on the kids, and I can see that would set her off.
Oh,
But I think that there was a step that could have been made there in that, hey, policeman, this woman is beating my kids.
well, not only that, like, where's the like? Was there an intervention? Has
Yeah.
there been any kind of like? Has there been any kind of anyone trying to do anything with Amani? Has there been any kind of, has she gone to rehab? Had they made any attempt whatsoever? Why was murder the only option?
Yeah.
It's a weird. Like, here's the thing too. Like, where is Paul's responsibility in this as well? Because they're not Amani's kids; they're Paul's kids, and Paul is kind of a big useless person in this. So complete denial about Amani's alcoholism and violence and the effect it's having on their kids. Killing Amani seems like such a strange, weird step.
Yeah. There should have been intervening steps, and nothing is mentioned about those steps. Like, yes, we know Amani's an alcoholic. We had tried, even when at the end, when she never says she was violent, my kids, was affecting my kids. They had bruises. They were wetting the bed. She never says we had tried to get her help.
Yeah.
And she just went straight from that to, and I decided to murder her.
Also, where's Child Protective Services?
Yeah.
Like, they have that in England. Why haven't they called? If she's that concerned about call them in and have them, they would keep an eye on. It's just,
Yeah.
there's a lot of other steps that just sort of goes to straight to murder.
Yeah.
Again, I think that kind of leads to sort of the broken nature at the end of this episode. It's just like Paul has to kind of come face to face with what his ex did, what his mom did, kind of has to come to face with what his wife did,
Mm-hmm.
and his own sort of uselessness in it.
He is a battered spouse,
That is true.
but he knew what was going on, and he should have had some intervention with Imani. And it's not that she's a bit of an asshole when she's sober, but she seems somewhat reasonable.
Yeah, but I also think they did a really good job of portraying her with a lot of classic alcohol. Like, the writers, I will say, did seem to really take into account sort of classic alcoholic behavior, such as big ego moments,
Mhm.
oh, I'm running a brewery and we got this big order, to the justification of why you would do certain things, the blacking out, the self, the denial. I thought she did a really strong. I don't know how much of that was the writer and how much of that was the actress bringing something in from research or whatever, but I thought that was a really smart way of doing it.
Yeah.
And I thought Jenny at the end is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That moment where she's like, this is the last birthday I'm going to have. Can I have, it's 2 minutes. I was like, I mean, just give her the afternoon, man.
Yeah.
You'll be lucky if she survives. She'll be lucky if she makes it to the trial.
Yeah.
Let her have the afternoon.
Yeah. If nothing else, for the innocent kids.
Yeah. But I will say is like after that whole heartbreaking situation, the last scene where they're all kind of hanging out in the brewery and it's jokey, like they kind of like a joke. It's kind of like trying to like ha ha ha. We're still it's a joke. It's like I feel like don't have that last scene.
Yeah.
Like the last moment should have been this woman with her kids and
Yeah.
just cut that last scene.
Yeah, they could have cut that, and I think it would have been stronger. It felt to me reminiscent of the way in the 70s and 80s they used to end crime dramas with that happy scene at the end.
The freeze frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that too. I think that's what it kind of feels like. It's just like, oh, this is really dark. We need to have a joke at the end, and it's just like you don't have someone saying they're dying, gonna go spend their last minutes to their kids, and then usually like have a really bad pun. It
Yeah.
just mm.
Yeah. Yeah, if it had ended on the candles being blown out, that would have been perfect.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I also just had one quick question. So, if Jenny is so dyslexic that she needs someone else's help to write her memoir,
Mhm.
how is she still a nurse? Because nurses have to read stuff.
Yeah, and they have to be very precise with what they're writing down, and a lot of it is acronyms and stuff like and initialisms and stuff that they can't
Yeah.
get wrong.
So I wasn't sure if like was she just saying that she was dyslexic and that's why she's with Adam, or
I think it may have just been a convenient excuse for her to have had an interaction with him.
yeah, I think that's so let's talk for a minute about the hysterically named Grundy family. Like kind of focusing on sort of the Keith Grundy's fake history now. Uh in the episode, Keith they say that Keith was working for this infamous gang called the Kentons. But Keith's dogs are named Ronnie and Reggie, which is really an indication that the Kentons are supposed to be the Krays. Now, most people, if you're listening to this in England, you probably are well familiar with the Krays. If you're in America, you might not know them as well. So, just a quick explanation that the Krays were major East End gangsters during the 60s. They were identical twins, Ronald and Reginald. Uh, they're, you know, they had a long, convoluted history, but in the 60s, they were nightclub owners who hobnobbed with the likes of Frank Sinatra, Dusty Springfield, Judy Garland, Richard Harris, among many others. But at the same time, they also ran this just notoriously powerful and very violent gang called the Firm. And they ruled the East End from the late 50s all the way up into 1968 when Scotland Yard finally managed to arrest them. So the Kentons, I think, are clearly meant to be the Krays, and Keith is basically hinting out that he hung out with them, which would have made him a very big deal and probably untouchable. Until the Krays found out, because if the Krays had found out that he was lying to them,
Yeah.
they would have murdered him. And I feel like that fake history. I think a lot of gangsters, like who had been with the Krays, would have probably just like called him out on it.
Yeah.
Fun fact: former star Midsummer star James Fox, who appeared on the Masterclass episode, we talked about him. He visited Ronnie Cray in prison to prep for his role in Performance, which
Yes.
was the one that kind of broke him through.
Yeah. So let's also talk about our brand new coroner because this is her first
Sure.
appearance, and what a first appearance!
She comes in hot. Yeah, she's already like from the moment first moment she's already in control, and she is not suffering fools, and you can clearly get the sense that she is not used to dealing with people like Barnaby, who I guess she would consider as a competent policeman.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have a feeling she's dealt with a lot of really stupid police.
Mm-hmm. I mean, she had some great lines. I give you another 30 years.
Yeah. That is perfect.
Sorry, I'm late. I was removing a chainsaw from a chest cavity, which is like, where's that Midsummer episode? Who's solving that one?
Well, she does mention that she wishes farmers wouldn't drink.
I kind of love that the way that they get her to come to dinner.
Wine.
This was a great intro. Like, you know, we are loud and proud in our love of Fleur.
Yes.
This was like the perfect introduction with one exception.
Nuts.
The coming in hard for Patty's castration was like, I really liked her until that point. I was just like, oh, I forgot about this. And they drop it after this. They drop it after this episode, but it was
Yeah.
like, yeah, the dog castration thing is a bit much. And it wasn't even like, you need to get your dog fixed. It's like, you need to get your dog castrated.
Well, she does have very forceful opinions.
Also, Patty seems to know what castration means because she said the word. He went hiding.
Reminds me of that Far Side cartoon where the dog's in the car and he says, "I'm going to the vet to get tutored," and he's so happy. That was not Patty.
No. So we get a lot of Fleur. We don't get a lot of Winters
No,
this episode.
but he does have a rather funny chase scene.
Oh God! So that scene where he is chasing. First of all, Kwame wasn't running so much as power walking.
It's almost like he looked over his shoulder and said, "Okay, I got to let this guy catch up with me."
Yeah, it's just like, oh, this is. I really shouldn't have had that one night stand. So tired. But also, Winters is just jogging. He's not even running.
Yeah.
So
He's got those tight pants on.
It just felt like something out of a Clouseau movie of just like some kind of chase scene. I did also find it funny is that when they're interrogating Kwame and questioning him on, you stayed while he left? That's not how one night stands works. I'm like, oh, go on, Barnaby and Winters. Let everyone know your history. Does Sarah know about this?
Uh-huh. I'm sure Detective Scott would have known that's how one night stands work.
Oh, Scott would have been like, get out. I just was like, no, the guy's sleeping. The other guy is like, oh, I'm just going to pop down to the brewery for an investigation. And now obviously we find out that, it was, and I was just like, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
It's not like this guy had anything worth stealing.
Yeah.
And then of course, Winters had the job of having to listen to all those tapes, which made me wonder, why is Adam using tapes?
It was 2018. It was not a current technology.
Wait a minute. No. Like digital recorders have been around for a very long time.
I know.
And like they, like I even hopped onto a online retail website to just see what they were priced at. You can get one for like $50.
Yeah. And they would have been easier to upload because they do mention that the tabloid received a digital file of that part of the interview. And she had the tape that she's, that had been stolen for her by Toby. And
which means that which means he would have had to have played the tape into the mic of the computer to get the digital recording.
It just seems weird.
It's very weird. I mean, if it's one of those things, like, oh, his character affectation is he liked old things, then where was his old clickety-clack typewriter?
Yeah.
Winter did have one classic little moment where Elaine Page's character recites some Shakespeare to him, and he has no idea what he's talking about.
Yeah. It's Jamie.
Yeah.
Not Horatio.
Yeah. And Barnaby's just... honestly, if this was The Office, Barnaby would have just looked at the camera and given one of those classic...
Yeah.
classic side eyes.
Yeah.
Now, since beer and brewing was such a big focal point of this episode, Eileen, you wanted to talk about the history of beer in your history corner?
I do. This is the history of beer in Great Britain, and it goes back a long ways. Beer was first brewed, and they're not exactly sure, but a date I saw was 8000 BCE. It was done by hunter-gatherer hipsters in the Middle East, is where it started.
Middle East Williamsburg?
Yeah. It was made from wild wheat and barley, and that helped. It was one of the things that helped lead to the development of agriculture. Beer was often used in ancient times to pay workers and was even mentioned in sacred texts, but it was very different from what we know today as beer. For one thing, it didn't have hops, which we'll get to later. Beer arrived in Great Britain around 4500 BCE. Its main ingredients, even today, are water, a starch that can be fermented, brewer's yeast, and flavoring. In the Orkney Islands, Neolithic farmers brewed beer that included henbane, hemlock, and deadly nightshade, and then one assumes they went on to found Hogwarts. Grain and honey beer was also very popular in Britain around 300 BCE, though all local brew pubs had their own recipes. In 43 CE, the Romans invaded Britain, bringing with them their wine culture. But in about 60 years, everyone was drinking beer, and most likely wearing those slouchy knit beanie caps. Around 500 CE, the Angles and the Saxons came, bringing with them their tradition of beer halls, alehouses, and oompa bands. They recognized 3 types of beer: a mild ale, a sour clear ale, and a Welsh ale that was likely made from wheat and honey. In 822, in a French monastery of all places, hops was added for the first time. It was still a wild crop at the time, but would slowly be cultivated so that people could later argue over how hoppy a beer should be. In Britain, however, they still flavored their beers with something called gruit, which was an herb mixture. Some herbs that were used included heather, ivy, horehound, mugwort, sweet gale, and yarrow. Everyone loved beer. Everyone drank beer. Women often brewed beer for home use or for the tavern, and it was considered much safer to drink than water. It was usually brewed and consumed locally, but then men started taking over and organizing themselves into guilds, and it became all hipstery again. Around the middle of the 14th century, hopped beer was imported to Britain, and the brewing of hopped beer began around 60 years later, mainly by immigrants from the areas that now make up Belgium and the Netherlands. It wasn't yet Heineken or Stella Artois, though, and it was often considered too foreign for a good Englishman to drink. Around 1520, though, hops cultivation began in Kent. By 1540, our good friend Henry VIII had 2 suppliers delivering regularly to Hampton Court. Massive amounts of beer were drunk by the Tudor court, from the lowliest staff to the noblest duke. The Tudor army marched not on its stomach, but on beer. In 1790, Hodgson's Pale Ale was introduced to supply sailors on long sea voyages to India and the Americas. This developed into what became known as India Pale Ale, or IPA. During World War I, the strength of beer was restricted quite drastically, and British beers have never returned to their pre-World War I strength. During the Great Depression, there was a Beer is Best campaign to encourage the drinking of British beers. The 1960s saw the rise of bitter beer, using kegs rather than casks and external carbon dioxide. In the 1980s, lagers became popular again, going from 2% of sales to over half, mostly of the Pilsner type. Carling Lager is the best-selling beer in Britain, followed by Foster's Lager. Burton-upon-Trent is the center of brewing in the UK. In the early years of the new millennium, tax relief was given to smaller breweries, which helped in the rise of microbrews. In Britain, the term real ale is used to designate beers that are brewed from traditional ingredients without the use of carbon dioxide. Ale is used for beer fermented at a higher temperature and that uses yeast that gathers on the top during fermentation, while lager, which is sometimes just referred to as beer, is fermented at a lower temperature and uses yeast that ferments at the bottom. Now, there's a whole bunch of beers that originated in England, and I suggest you go to the Beer Day Britain website, which has a bit of history of each and some really great food pairings. It's beerdaybritain.co.uk. And just a small history aside, 1539 was the height of the dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII, so the monks' days at the abbey were numbered anyway.
I kind of think funny is like the term real ale, just today's like social media world is just like, oh, this is real ale. I'm talking down to you peasant. You don't know what real ale is.
There's as much snobbery in the beer community as there is in the wine community, the whiskey community, amongst the foodies. It's, any of these groups have their snobbies.
Well, that like kind of leads into one of our things under the home life is that bit where Barnaby and Sarah at the beginning go to the Real Ale Society, and Sarah makes that, what was that what does she say?
Isn't craft brew and real ale the same thing?
And then it was like they might have as well have had a record scratch. Because everyone just turns and looks at her and just like, oh boy. And of course, room full of white men.
Yeah.
There was it was a quiet home life episode, not much besides that moment. and the attempts to protect Patty's nuts.
I do love when Winter, before he answered the door for Fleur, kind of, primped himself.
She's judgy. I will say that they made a big thing with Barnaby reading the bedtime story, but wasn't he supposed to be doing funny voices? Wasn't that like she comes down as like, Daddy needs to do the voices? I'm like,
I guess the voices were slightly lowering his voice for all the characters. But the funny voices would not have worked as the voiceover for the murder of Amani at that time.
oh, I just thought maybe the daughter had inherited the dad's sarcasm. Well, Dad's got to come do his funny voice, which is his voice. So, final thoughts on Ghost of Causton Abbey?
Again, as we talked about this is a fairly dark episode, and very tragic. There are some humorous things. Obviously, introducing Fleur is going to up the humor factor, but the murder is a tragic figure. The victim is, I find, kind of tragic in her own way, and one wishes that maybe something before you got to this murder stage had happened to intervene. And the poor kids. I mean, for me, the kids are, at the end. That's why, when I said they should have ended at the blowing out the candles, that would have just been perfect.
Yeah, I think they left a lot of stuff out because they obviously wanted the twist of the reveal to be a bit of a surprise. And I do think that if they played up that Amani was an alcoholic who was not willing to seek treatment, or they couldn't get her to get help, I think that would have taken a lot of the surprise away. But it does create sort of a murkier motivation. That said, I think it's a very, like I said, this is a stronger episode than I remember. And I do feel that it's that kind of the dark, tragic element that makes it stand out more. It's not, like the whole episode wasn't really weird or goofy. There was some, there was some of the humor elements, obviously, but when you get to the ending, it's a heartbreaker. Like
Yeah.
and I don't normally feel this way with Midsomer. I actually was like, oh man, that is really sad.
Yeah. There were, I thought, some really subtle hints and clues in there that weren't over-explained or weren't overdone. When they walk in on her with the medication and she explains it away as being for Keith, and it is obviously for herself that she was taking the medication, and she wasn't wanting anybody to know about it.
Yeah.
And the whole idea with the dogs is played very well, I thought.
I really want to give. We didn't mention it so far when we talked about the cast, but I really want to give a shout out to Angela Griffin for that final scene. It is, her performance is what makes it work, and she anchors it so well. There, it's a well acted episode from across the board.
Yeah, I do think it is a very strongly acted episode. I think Amber Aga is terrific as Amani.
Yeah.
I do like Michael Byrne as Keith Grundy. He brings a good gruffness to that role, and you believe him up until that end.
I mean, he's also got a twinkle in the eye. He's having a little bit of fun there. It's just basically just like, what if I threatened him?
Yeah.
What if? Yeah, no, I was a gangster. So what?
Yeah. Tony Gardner does a great job with the stick in the mud character, which is always a bit, I think it's probably harder than people think it is, because you've got to be really unlikable.
The more you sort of dig under the layers of this episode, there's really strong, believable, with the exception of just like they don't give us enough information about the Imani murder, about why she had to be murdered. I feel like everyone's motivations seem plausible. It makes sense and, believable.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's everything we wanted to talk about. So we want to thank everyone for listening to us. If you had anything you wanted to discuss about A Ghost of Causton Abbey or Midsomer Murders, feel free to email us at welcometomidsomer@gmail.com. If you want us to use the email in the show, please just say so in your email. We are also Welcome to Midsomer on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you liked what you heard, please consider subscribing to us or rating and reviewing us on iTunes. That really helps people find us. Also, tell all your friends about us. We will be back next month So we hope you will join us again. And as we take the road out of Midsomer, we want to thank you again for listening and remind you that in Midsomer, brew and beer can be murder.
And usually is.
Welcome to Midsomer is produced by Eric Buscher and Eileen Becker. All clips in this podcast are used in compliance with the U.S. Copyrights Act fair use exemption for criticism and commentary. Our logo and podcast art was designed by Smeedray. Our theme music is by the infamous Space.
Now, blah, blah, blah. Now we have
Now we have blah, blah, blah.
yeah. Okay.